Welcome to Fish on Fridays. My name's Al McCauley, and I love to hear about saints that I've never heard of before. I love to do research and find out more about them because I don't know why it's intriguing to me, and I love studying the saints. And recently I was introduced to the name of a saint that I'd never heard of. Her name is Saint Germaine Cousin. She was born in France right toward the end of the 16th century. She's going to die in 1601 at the age of 22, so she was a very young woman. But I was just absolutely remarkable woman. I was just blown away by her story. And I thought, boy, I'm going to share this as an episode of Fish on Fridays. Her feast day every year is on June 15th. So she's a good person to remember that time of year too. She's a simple girl, very poor, but very pious Catholic girl. And she had some problems from the get-go. At birth, she had a deformity in her arm. She suffered from something called, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, scrofula, which is really a disfiguring kind of a blistering on the neck and in her face and on her arms. And she suffered with this. And she was, I'm trying to be nice about this. She was not easy to look at in that regard because of these deformities. Unfortunately for Germaine, her mom died when she was very young. And as was probably the custom at that time, wanting another mother in the house, her dad remarried. And boy, it sounds like something right out of a fairy tale, but her stepmother was very, very mean to her. In fact, she was so repulsed by how Germaine looked, the physical deformities and whatnot, that she just couldn't tolerate her in her own home, and she ended up kicking her out of the house. She just couldn't deal with it. And so she was forced to kind of fend for herself. And so one of the things she did to help bring in a little bit of money was she worked as a shepherdess. And this was barely enough to make ends meet for her, obviously, because she's a young lady. But in that time, women weren't given the work that men would have been doing normally. But as I said, she was a very pious woman, despite the deformities, despite the physical setbacks, and certainly her stepmother's meanness toward her. She never lost her piety. She prayed the rosary very frequently. She went to Mass daily. In fact, there's a miracle about her that's attributed to her. From her, where she was staying, her house, to the church that she would go to Mass, to daily Mass, there was a little footbridge over a creek. And when it would rain, it would oftentimes swell to the point where the footbridge was covered and she couldn't pass it. And so it was said that she could stop in front of the footbridge when it was flooded over, and she could pray, and the waters would separate just enough for her to walk across so she could make it to Mass. Despite her piety, adults reviled her. They looked at her physical ailments and they judged her by them, and they really were repulsed by her. But children, it was said, really were drawn to her because she was very kind and she was very accepting and very loving. Because of being kicked out of the house, she was forced to live under a stairwell in a barn. And she was only given so much food every day. She had a daily allowance. At the end of the day, she would be invited into the house to clean up, and she would sometimes be given the scraps of that food as her only food for the day. And there was a story that one time she was in the house, and her stepmother thought she took more scraps than were allotted for her on a given day. And as she left the house, the stepmother chased after her. When she caught up to her, she looked in her apron pockets to see if there was more food there than Germaine should have taken, and there were flowers that had miraculously appeared. And that's the point where the stepmother started to realize, wow, maybe there's something to this young woman's holiness, and kind of felt bad about this. Unfortunately, it wasn't too long after this incident that Germaine is going to pass away, most likely due to severe malnutrition, because she just ate so infrequently. But, she never lost her kindness. And she was buried in a very simple grave. But 40 years later, a little over 40 years later, her body was exhumed. People would pray to her, and they would have miracles happen because they were asking for her intercession. And so they dug up her body a little over 40 years later to give it a better, more proper burial, if you will, in a graveyard in a church. And they found that her body was incorrupt. And not just incorrupt, meaning it hadn't decayed at all. It also lacked any deformity or any blemish that she had when she was living. So given this and the fact that she lived a very pious life, she was considered at that point saintly by those who knew her and those in the village or in villages around her. And eventually she was canonized in 1867 by Pope Pius IX. And she is recognized and invoked as the patron saint of those who are abused and those who are abandoned. But since her death in 1601, she is said to have appeared more than 400 times to different believers who have asked for her intercession. And a lot of them, many of them have claimed to have been cured of illnesses and of different problems that they have, different ailments that they have. So Saint Germaine Cousin is one of those people that, again, I'd never heard of her before I did this research, and I just found her to be a fascinating young lady. And, she reminds me, it makes me think of what ailments do I have? What deformities do I have? Maybe not of body, but of mind or spirit. What do I struggle? What limitations do I struggle with? Can I pray with her to help to receive God's grace to deal with them? She was never cured of those ailments, those limitations during her physical life. It wasn't until after her death that she was cured of them, but she found a way to persevere through prayer, through constant prayer and piety and kindness, and she never lost that. And I wonder, when I'm faced with limitations, can I react the same way? So Saint Germaine's a great person to look to in that context, and someone to pray to and someone to pray with when you are suffering from limitations of any kind, or if you have family members that you might not agree with, like she didn't agree with her stepmother, to pray for those people and to learn from the lesson of Saint Germaine Cousin. Thanks for watching. I hope this has been helpful. Please feel free to share the content if you'd like. We'd be grateful if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on Facebook. But either way, thank you so much for tuning in every Friday for Fish on Fridays. Until next time, please be good to each other and God bless.